The Forsaken Hollows DLC added a surprising amount of new lore for Elden Ring Nightreign, and gave us new insights into the Outer Gods and the Gloam-Eyed Queen. It also acts as a coda to the Dark Souls trilogy. Let's start with my favorite Nightfarer, the Scholar. During his remembrance, we find out that he is actually an Albinauric. According to one of the greatest item descriptions in the game, the Albinauric Blood Clot, Albinaurics are life forms made by human hands. Thus, many believe them to live impure lives untouched by the Erd Tree's grace. He also bleeds white when hit, which is a nice piece of attention to detail. In Elden Ring, we encounter 3 types of Albinaurics: old men, female archers, and frogs. The old men Albinaurics have lost their legs and are forced to crawl, while the female archers have to use wolves as mobility aids. As we learn in the Albinauric village from Dumbledore,
"My legs will soon fade, and with them my life. Alas, this is the immovable fate of all Albinaurics."
As for the frogs, they're actually the 2nd generation. While the frogs are mute, they can do sick cartwheels, which seems like a fair trade-off to me. Not only does it look hilarious, I think the cartwheels boost circulation to their legs and feet, which prevents their blood from clotting. So I think the cartwheels are actually intentional, which just makes them even funnier. Although the male first generation we see are feeble, they weren't always that way. In Shadow of the Erd Tree, we can fight Commander Gaius, who is both a fearsome hog rider and an Albinauric. In fact, Gaius was once like an elder brother to Radahn. Both men actually learned gravity magic from the same Alabaster Lord, though Gaius was considered the most senior disciple. And a fun fact, the DLC also mentions a Gaia, which I think might be the name of Gaius's hog. And if that's the case, I wonder if Leonard also learned gravity magic. Getting back to Nightreign, the Scholar seeks a cleansing tear for his remembrance. At first, the Scholar believed that the cleansing tear is our desire manifest, that which will save our kind from its fate. And the Scholar is able to get his hands on the tear after exploring a tower in the Great Hollow. According to its description, the cleansing tear is a fast-acting medicine for a disease that afflicted the Albinaurics that works by removing invasive contaminants. The vassal who developed the medicine did so by testing it on his own body. It was successful and used to treat patients, but the vassal himself passed, his sickness already too advanced. Both the disease and the cure are not mentioned in the annals of history, and this person responsible for their mission is unknown. As for the disease, my best guess is that the cleansing tear was supposed to be medicine to treat the illness that cripples or even takes away the Albinaurics' legs. I'll also point out that during the remembrance, you encounter figures who are kneeling. At first I thought they were kneeling as a gesture of respect, but if they're Albinaurics, this would mean that they already lost the ability to walk and stand upright, which would reinforce their desperation for a cure. Finding the cleansing tear in Nightreign is a counterpart to helping Latenna deliver the birthing droplet in Elden Ring.
Yes, I'm a gatekeeper and a hater. I'm also God's favorite princess and the most interesting girl in the world.
After we find the Albinauric woman, we have to escort her all the way to the consecrated snowfields. There we can find the apostate derelict and see a giant Albinauric woman. We also know that the Albinaurics are said to come from a primordial drop of dew. So I wonder if this birthing droplet quest is supposed to set up a 3rd generation of Albinaurics. The Nightreign DLC does give us a fascinating item description that sheds new light on the origins of the Albinaurics. During Undertaker's questline, you find the Scholar trapped inside a crystal, which gives you the Scholar's primal core. This is a silver organ with pulsing veins, still pumping despite its detachment. Its flesh writhes with desire for a new host. The core is undeniable evidence that the Scholar is an entirely different form of life. This immediately reminded me of the primal glintstones used by Sellen and other primeval sorcerers. In essence, a primal glintstone is a sorcerer's soul, and this effectively lets sorcerers swap bodies and give them a form of immortality. And in the mountaintops of the giants, you can find a primal glintstone blade. The old sorcerers would slice open their hearts with these blades to imbue a primal glintstone with their soul, and thus did they die. So in a similar vein, I believe the Primal Core will let the Albinaurics achieve their own type of immortality. Now, it's unclear if all of the Albinaurics have a Primal Core, or if this is a newer invention. Personally, I think the Scholar is a 3rd generation Albinauric. And my main reason is that some of the Cuckoo Knights have had a dramatic change of heart in the Forsaken Hollows. Because the Albinaurics are seen as impure and outside the Erd Tree, they are routinely persecuted by many groups in the lands between. The Scholar as an Albinauric is a nice parallel to Iron Eye, who is one of those who live in death, another group persecuted for falling outside of Marika's Golden Order. According to the Albinauric Shield, their most formidable foes were sorcerers, specifically the Cuckoo Knights from Raya Lucaria. This is made abundantly clear by the Albinauric Pot, which is enchanted by sorceries of the Cuckoos. The Knights of the Cuckoos do declare, "Behold thy defiled blood," unlike any humor that flows in our grand realm. I'll also point out that the Albinauric Pot has a top that looks a lot like the black dumpling used to torture Albinaurics at the Volcano Manor. So the implication is that the Cuckoo Knights were trafficking the Albinaurics to Rykord. But in Nightreign, there now seems to be a split among the Cuckoos in how they feel about the Albinaurics. Although you can still find Cuckoo Knights actively fighting against the Albinaurics, there are some that have more inclusive attitudes. Even though the Scholar is an Albinauric, he is also a member of the School of Hieratus, who seeks knowledge through travel. In Elden Ring, the Crown of Hieratus was granted to scholars who engaged in nomadic study away from the Academy of Raya Lucaria. It's also worth mentioning that the most famous sorcerer to don the Hieratus Glintstone crown was the errant sorcerer Wilhelm, who had gone so far as to make contact with the primeval current. And during the Scholar's remembrance, you encounter an NPC ghost who's a Cuckoo Knight and concerned for the Albinaurics. In fact, the Scholar even gets the cleansing tear from a Cuckoo Knight trapped inside a crystal. That knight is implied to be an Albinauric since he says, "The cleansing tear was to be your salvation." We also know from the Cuckoo Surcoat that it depicts twin cuckoos peering into a flourishing mass of glintstone. To a glintstone sorcerer, the body is a transient thing. The cuckoo alone knows its insignificance, yet watches over it all the same. So if a 3rd generation of Albinaurics are operating on a system that's akin to the primeval current, they could be seen as more acceptable to some of the cuckoos. Defeating the Dreglord is also required to finish the Scholar's remembrance. After you defeat him, Stragus drops a headband of the Golden Ones, which were worn by the Albinaurics in Elden Ring, and an NPC ghost advises the Scholar during his remembrance, "To whoever shared this blood, though I know not which age you traveled from, cast hatred aside, heed not the call of the broken and discorded. They are trapped within the detritus, offer them solace, have mercy upon the dregs. At long last we can rest." And this actually ties back into the lore of Elden Ring. In the village of the Albinaurics, you can hear them actually mutter a curse under their breath. You can hear bits and pieces, but the Red Scholar was able to get the full audio.
"Oh, stars all night, oh, fit, punish them all, punish the world entire. We speak to those who forsake us, to this world that shuns our kind. Punish every living thing. Punish every living thing."
But by defeating the Dreglord, the Albinaurics are no longer filled with hatred and an all-consuming desire for vengeance. In the end, the Scholar accepts the fact that while the cleansing tear could not change our fate, it still changed the course of history. Forsaken Hollows also gives us some new insights into one of the most mysterious figures of Elden Ring's lore, the Gloam-Eyed Queen. Before she was defeated by Malakath, the Gloam-Eyed Queen led the Godskins and commanded the god-slaying power of the Black Flame. And in the Forsaken Hollows, when the Scholar explores the Great Hollow to find the cleansing tear, you get ambushed by 2 Cuckoo Knights and a Godskin Apostle. And outside of his remembrance, when you visit that area, it's guarded by a Godskin duo. And that area is heavily linked to the Corians, with the presence of the Lazuli Glintstone Scholars, who hewed to the heterodox belief that the moon was equal to the stars. Many moons ago, I had a whole video that identified Vanala as one of the possible candidates for the Gloam-Eyed Queen. In that video, I pointed out that Ranni and Vanala both wear a purple brooch that's very similar to the ones worn by the Godskin apostles and nobles. Godskins also guard two of Vanala's children, Ranni and Dreglord, who were both involved in the Night of the Black Knives. And the Godslayer's greatsword is found at the very bottom of Radahn's Divine Tower. If Vanala were in fact a Gloam-Eyed Queen, this would add an extra motivation for why the Golden Order fought 2 wars in Liurnia. In addition, Smoughtown has a great theory that the Albinaurics are related to the Godskins, and I do recommend checking out his video. I will point out that the Albinauric mask encourages players to make that comparison. A far cry from Godskin, this Albinauric hide mask is the product of malicious mockery. Let's talk about everyone's favorite sexy nun. As her name suggests, the Undertaker once used her hammer as a ceremonial tool to lay the sacred dead in their coffins. But now she wields her hammer against the living, whom she prays will avoid a similar torment and rest in eternal peace. The Undertaker was an orphan and grew up at a monastery. But the Undertaker was not like other girls. She hunted beasts in the woods, partook of their flesh and blood. As I grew, I learned that my constitution required a constant stream of power to consume. Once I tried to resist, but the shakes and pains became unbearable. As the delirium reached its zenith, I had bitten my own arm without knowing. And we see the struggle firsthand during her questline. Unable to resist her urges, she licks a wall to absorb the power of night. Seeing the Undertaker in this state really hammers home just what she will do to satisfy her cravings. It's easy to see the Undertaker as an allegory for addiction. Not only does this unlock a new kink, licking a wall is actually thematically resonant. See, in Elden Ring, literally consuming other people is a pretty common way to take on new powers. I believe that the Night Lord gains its power by consuming warriors and lesser Night Lords. There's also the fact that the Recluse gave birth to the Gnawling, which has a boundless appetite before it was subsumed by the Night Lord. The Duchess even calls the Night Lord a Devourer of Worlds, which is also the same name for the Ash of War on the Devourer's scepter, which is clearly associated with Dreglord. Speaking of Dreglord, he is the clearest example of becoming powerful through mukbangs.
Join yourself and King as remedy. Together we will devour the very god.
Even though Dreglord waged war against the Erd Tree, his ultimate sin wasn't blasphemy, but gluttony.
Pray to Dreglord's ambitions, though blasphemous, marked him a worthy sovereign, but they were reduced to gluttonous depravity once he gave himself to the serpent.
Then there's the Frenzied Flame, which Melina calls
chaos, devouring life and thought unending.
There's also the practice of Dragon Communion, where you snack on a dragon's heart to get its power. As our dragon waifu explains in The Shadow of the Erd Tree,
seek communion. Sate your boundless appetite. Feel the euphoria of a dragon's essence taking root in your meager frame.
the dragons Adula and Smaragd also seem to have a reverse dragon communion, since they were the ones who consumed sorcerers and gained their powers. But gluttony can be your downfall. Consuming too many dragon hearts has turned people into worms, and if you eat Baal's heart, the purest form of communion, the throbbing heart of Baal continues to resist its subjugation, never weakening. One day, the fire within will consume the very body and soul of the communion devourer. But for the Undertaker, her remembrance gives her a way to keep her cravings in check. After the scholar hands her a night-hued glass, her journal tells us, "Perhaps this will help me overcome the hunger, without feasting on the succor of night." It's basically Limveld's version of Ozempic. The Undertaker also has her own unique interaction with Heolstor. After you defeat him, she tears off one of his fingers. This severed finger tells us that the Undertaker held a faint glimmer of hope, that she might finally shed the dreadful power that enshrouds her. but she knew her hopes were only fantasies, and so she became determined to at least find comfort. The night was brought to an end, but the loathsome hex would be hers forever. Now this is speculation on my part, but it is fascinating that Heolstor's dismembered finger looks a lot like the tarnished finger you can use for multiplayer. In Elden Ring, fingers are used to invade other worlds, and the furled finger of the tarnished is a relic of those who came before, left to help those who would come after. So I think the Undertaker severing this finger from the Night Lord and leaving it allows other Nightfarers to continue this fight. It's also worth mentioning that the final cutscene that shows a giant emerging doesn't play after the Undertaker's remembrance. That's also the case for the Wilder, Iron Eye, and the Recluse, which all have their own unique interactions. Let's talk about the Balancers. According to the will of the Balancers relic, there once was a tiny farming village besieged by bandits, who proceeded to ravage both its plots and people. A young village girl, seeking help, dashed into the forest, where she prayed to the statue of a protective deity that held a weapon raised overhead. By the end, the village was steeped in red and settled in silence. The village girl, drenched in blood, stood with a vacant stare and a heroic weapon in her grip. Now, I have two theories for who this village girl is referring to. It could be a reference to the Undertaker. See, when you start the DLC and meet the Undertaker in the chapel, a golden light shines down, and a prompt tells us, "A voice is heard from within the light. We shall descend when the world desires balance." We also learn that the Undertaker has no parents or family to call my own, which would be because they were slaughtered by those bandits. After that massacre, the Undertaker eventually found refuge in the monastery she grew up in. The Undertaker also has a rather balanced view of the night. It feels like a blessing and a curse. Its taste is bitter, and it makes me nauseous, yet somehow, it soothes my ever-changing mind. Finally, towards the end of her quest line, she's given a crystal by the scholar, who tells her
This crystal is stabilized, churned by night to a state of equilibrium. It's not much, but it will sate your thirst.
In other words, this crystal will give the Undertaker a new sense of balance in her life. If the Undertaker is the village girl in the Balancer's relic, this would also make her an even clearer thematic parallel to Marika. Much like Marika, the Undertaker is a strength faith build that specializes in hammers. Both are the last surviving members of their villages, which were brutally ransacked. But unlike the Undertaker, who prayed to a god, Marika instead became a god. My other theory is that the village girl in this relic is the most powerful Harmonia. That is the one we see who comes down in the second phase, as well as the giant worm we see in their enhanced version. For more insight into the Balancers, let's turn to their description in the Expeditions menu. The Balancers are 7 Valkyries clad in white armor. These servants of heaven restore the balance of the world by wielding heroic weapons that purify chaos. But even heroines must one day sleep, so why not retire early to the annals of history? Being called Valkyries immediately made me think of Melania and her offspring, the Scarlet Valkyries. As we learn from Gowry,
Nurtured by betrayal, her bud will flower most vividly. When Melania ascends to godhood, Millicent too shall be reborn, as a scarlet Valkyrie. You can't tell me you don't wish to see it? The superior bud that is Millicent becoming the finest of flowers?
this parallel is even more clear when fighting the Balancers, since their attacks are very similar to Melania's second phase, as well as the sacred Phalanx Ash of War, which is used by the Cleanrot Knights and one of Millicent's sisters. The Balancers also reminded me of the Winged Scythe, which has this fascinating line of flavor text. According to pagan belief, white-winged maidens are said to be Death's gentle envoys. However, I don't think the Balancers are these winged white maidens. In Elden Ring, Death with a capital D is usually associated with either destined death or death blight, and thankfully, none of the balancers inflict either of those status effects. There's also the fact that none of the balancers use scythes or reapers in their attacks, but I do think they are a parallel to these gentle envoys. And if the balancers are envoys, they could serve a similar function to the oracle envoys. It is said that when oracle envoys appear, playing their pipes, they do so to herald the arrival of a new god, or a new age. And in a similar vein, defeating the balancers heralds the arrival of the Dreglord. So the balancers are clearly associated with some type of deity, and we find out which deity thanks to their enhanced version. Since they inflict bleed, I believe they are all servants of the Formless Mother, also known as the Mother of Truth. Akin to how the Scarlet Valkyries serve the outer god of rot, with Millicent resisting that fate, the Balancers serve another outer god, the Formless Mother. And the Balancers also seem to be coerced into fighting, at least judged by their movesets. I'll also point out that the statue the girl prayed to had a weapon raised overhead. This reminded me of how Mohg and the Blood Fiends commune with the Formless Mother by stabbing the sky above them. So I think this pose could also be how the Formless Mother would be depicted in a statue. I also think the Formless Mother was the protective god the girl prayed to. The Formless Mother has a long track record of answering the prayers of the downtrodden. When Mohg stood before the Mother of Truth, deep underground, his accursed blood erupted with fire, and he was besotted with the defilement that he was born into. And in Shadow of the Erd Tree, we learn about the Blood Fiends, a subjugated tribe that discovered a twisted deity among the ravages of war. The Mother of Truth was their savior. Finally, let's talk about the Dreglord and how he fits into the lore for both Nightreign and the Dark Souls trilogy. The Dreglord is a corpse fiend comprising countless bodies and discarded detritus. However they are torn apart or pulverized, their communal resentment rives with determination, outwitting every form of annihilation. This obsessive mound of flesh, unlike any form of life ever to exist, has no obvious weakness. And according to the Knight of Dreg's relic, the traces left behind by countless battles were pelted by rains, transported by muddy streams, and collected in deposits. This mixture of remorse, desperation, and sorrow eventually formed legs, stood of its own accord, and finally voiced a curse that would be its mantra: smash, smash, smash the Knight. This intense hatred of the Knight is also why the first phase is called Traitorous Stregus, and from Heolstor's relic, we know that the Night Lord was just another body in a giant pile, before he crawled out on a dark and stormy night. So it sounds like the Dreglord, all the piles of bodies that Heolstor climbed out of, and that pile only grew as Heolstor left corpse after corpse in his wake. The word dreg is very important. In Elden Ring, we learn from Alexander's innards that the jars contain dregs, inherited from those who came before. Thus our warriors passed from jar to jar, carrying dreams of greatness. And the ornamental straight sword tells us that after falling from grace, the dregs of the golden lineage sought power and purpose in the past. Stregus is a combination of not just soldiers but also ordinary civilians. It's also worth mentioning that Stregus, no H, one fewer S, is Latin for defeat or overthrow, which fits the Dreglord quite well. We also get a bit more insight from both the Scholar and the Undertaker.
Mass of the flesh, blood and souls of the fallen, bound together in the form of the Dreglord, whose stature rivals even that of the Night Lord. Had you not heard of the odious thirst for vengeance, the determination of a wounded soul? When morality and reason are surely cast aside, and such a force, driven by a singular will, does not rest until it is made whole. We must bring an end to it ourselves.
A great heap of castaway things. The aftermath of the long night. In this land now spilling over with rubble and dead. But my opinion counts for little in this matter. The corpses are piled high. A truth undeniable. We are duty-bound to act.
It's also worth discussing that Stregus can inflict scarlet rot. As I pointed out in a previous video, the rotted wood shifting earth has been transformed by the power of the outer god of rot. But in Elden Ring, that outer god was sealed away by the blue dancer, who also taught Malenia. So I think the outer god of rot has found a new vessel in Stragus, and this theory is further backed up by the fact that in his second phase, pure impulse Stragus can actually take away part of the favor of the rotted woods. So with the Forsaken Hollows DLC, Limveld is effectively a staging ground for a massive cosmic battle between three outer gods. The outer god of night, represented by Heolstor and the various Night Lords, the Formless Mother and her balancers, and finally the Dreglord and the outer god of rot. Not only does Stragus fit in well with the lore of Nightreign and Elden Ring, he also provides some pretty clear connections to the world of Dark Souls. Now, this might be controversial, but I think Nightreign might be connected to the Dark Souls trilogy. But it doesn't have any major revelations for the worlds of Lordran, Drangleic, or Lothric. Before we get into it, I do want to address the elephant in the room. Before Nightreign came out, game director Junya Ishizaki said he wanted to use bosses from Dark Souls because I thought it'd be kind of fun. So the main impulse for reusing bosses was from a gameplay perspective and not really for the lore. And I think this is still the case for Stragus. He does feel like an appropriate continuation from where we left off in the Ring City. In this shared universe, Nightreign happened long after the ending for DS3. For starters, we have this tweet from the official Dark Souls account. In the night, ancestral foes await, remnants of a fire that once burned bright. And this is further backed up in Nightreign itself. When you defeat the Nameless King, Dancer of the Boreal Valley, or the Demon Princes, they're still called an Heir of Fire, just like in DS3. Now, FromSoft could have used a more generic noun-verbed message, but they chose one that actually has lore significance. In addition, Maris being called the Fathom of Night is more literally translated as the deep sea of the night. The kanji used is the same kanji used to describe the deep that Aldrich once saw. I do think it's clever that the Dreglord is a combination of reanimated corpses, both in the setting and story of Nightreign and as a game mechanic. To me, the Dreglord comes across as a combination of Gravelord Nito, Manus, and Gale. He spews Scarlet Rot, which is Elden Ring's version of Toxic, and he also spans ads all throughout his fight. And like Nito, the Dreglord's body is compiled of various corpses. The Dreglord's moveset is clearly reminiscent of both Manus, the Father of the Abyss in Dark Souls 1, and Gale from the Ring City DLC for DS3. Stragus, being called Pure Impulse in his second phase, reminded me of the Pursuer's spell from DS1, which you get by trading the soul of Manus. The will feels envy or perhaps love, and despite the inevitably trite and tragic ending, the will sees no alternative and is driven madly towards its target. And I also wonder if the Dreglord is a subtle nod to the Dreg Heap found in the Ring City.
All lands meet at the end of the earth. Great kingdoms and anemic townships will be one and the same. The great tide of human enterprise, all for naught. That's why I'm so taken by this grand sight. This must be what it's like to be a god.
Thank you so much for watching. I'd love to know what Yens think.